Let me see. Last time we ended on the diagram, not so.
Yes, we saw the diagram. Anyway, that diagram, we did not explain it very well. The diagram where Nkrumah was talking about how the interaction of capitalist exploitation and imperialist exploitation, and how the bridge between these two is finance capital. The capitalist exploiters and the imperialist exploiters who are outside, of course, uh, they come from outside. What is showing is that they come from outside into the colonial territories to carry out primitive imperialism, which is colonialism, and then the capitalist exploitation within the internal countries of the West, or the capitalist country,
Mm,
which he called extreme capitalism or fascism in one way. Yeah, so that diagram
mm,
we had not looked at it extensively to be able to understand it. But of course, I've understood it myself. But the intersection is international capital. That is the bridging aspect in between that exploitation.
yeah.
Yeah. So the primitive, what he
And
called in primitive imperialism is the colonialism. And then maybe he wants to say that the real, the imperialism, which was not primitive, I think it's the one which they were carrying out with slavery, absolute imperialism.
mm, I'm looking at it. I'm seeing I think the primitive, it is the reason why they call it primitive imperialism, it is that it is the imperial powers, but they have boots on the ground. So they are like they're the colonialists were in Africa.
Okay,
It was imperialism, but taking on the shape of colonialism.
okay,
Then, mm, then imperialist exploitation from outside, that one may be neo-colonialism. It is exploitation from the outside, not so.
okay,
Then, uh, then when these people accumulate capital, they do what? They they I'm seeing international finance capital. It is they are saying that what I see is that international finance capital. It is the capital which finances the capitalist exploitation of other nations.
mm,
Then extreme capitalism, that is fascism. When they ask Lenin says that what is when they ask him what is fascism, he says fascism is capitalism in decay. Extreme that is extreme capitalism. In
okay.
fascism, fascism, not so.
Yes, fascism is
Fascism is
Mussolini and Hitler.
mm, yeah, fascism. It is most times like when you see, like for example, the reason why they say it's Mussolini and Hitler it is because fascism is when like a small group of people looks at themselves as if they have been cheated, they
Okay,
have been exploited by the others, so they look at exploiting, they look at becoming what at fighting those people who have cheated them by exploiting even other nations around them. So they
okay,
look at themselves as if they are very important. That is extreme capitalism. You're looking at yourself as if you're very important, so you decide to be cheating others around you, all your friends. But in terms of nations, not in terms of a person. If you would be a person, we would call it some sort of like opportunism. Opportunism for a person, fascism for a nation, for nations.
okay. So this capitalist exploitation inside, because what here Nkrumah was saying, that both in the colonial territories and the metropolitan states, the struggle has been waged against the same enemy, internal finance
Mm,
capital. under its external
mm,
and internal forms of exploitation. So the internal forms of
mm,
exploitation, I think it ties in very well to, it ties in very well into the explanation which you were giving, that to a certain extent they exploit internally and also want to exploit their fellow capitalist states. Like if you look at what Hitler and Mussolini wanted to do, they were claiming that they want to conquer, for example, even Britain or the other neighboring states like France and all these. And this is what led to their, downfall. And of course, they had their grievances, like Hitler, like you said, had his grievances that Germany was exploited and then it was humiliated, and stuff like that. So he wanted to restore Germany's, glory.
glory.
Yes, and all
Mm,
that stuff. So he resorted to these extreme measures whereby he saw Germany as much more advanced, or the Germans were more superior to the other Europeans and stuff like that. And then on the other side of
mm,
them, we see them with their colonialism exploiting the outside, which is the imperialist exploitation. So the internal exploitation within the imperialist camp, I think that is what Nkrumah has called the extreme capitalism, and then the primitive capitalism, which manifests through colonialism. That is the one which is outside the imperialist camp itself. Anyway, I don't know where we stopped last time. What was that? Did we see this chart number two, which speaks about capitalist, imperialist states, and then welfare state, the fascism, the welfare state, which was established after the people demanded, uh, you know, better working conditions. I remember we spoke about that, that people demanded better working
yeah,
conditions within the capitalist states. And then the former colonial countries, they demanded independence. And also, of course, it was share in their material resources. So this is the chart number two that he shows here, that we saw strengthened the workers' organizations, which led to the demanding of more, putting pressure and demanding more better working conditions from the capitalist imperialist states. And on the other side, there was expansion of liberation movements, and they also exerted pressure on the capitalist imperialist states. So what they did is that they created the welfare state. The welfare state was born, and therefore, we saw in the in the former colonies also, they camouflaged and they worked together to create the so-called neocolonialism. And you have on one side the genuine independent states, but also we have a mix of puppet states at the same time. So now in the West, what Nkrumah is showing here in the chart, in chart two, is that in the West we have a welfare state in certain cases, where when you look at places like Norway and all these countries, in France, where I heard it that in France they work for 6 hours. That is what I heard, something like that. So these are the better working conditions that were given to these people. But at the same time, we have some fascist elements, like what we have seen in Italy, what they have been calling Giorgia Meloni, and of course Donald Trump. And so on our side, we have neocolonialism, which is being carried out by the collective imperialism of the West through World Bank and IMF.
mm,
And then we have some genuine independent states, of course, a few of them like Eritrea. And then we have the puppet states like Ghana, and all the majority of them, majority of the African countries, they fall into the complete puppet states. So I think this is what Nkrumah is trying to demonstrate here in chart number two. I don't know what you think.
yes, what you're talking is actually, I see it is correct because they are looking at the internal ones within the within the imperialist nations. They were the capitalists were exploiting the workers, so they had to, when the workers stood up, they had to form welfare states As you have said, like the Norways, the Germans, uh, in Germany, like there is a federal system. Most of the most of Western Europe, you'll find that universities are free. There is good working opportunities, better working conditions. Then in the independence, genuinely independent states, we shall look at maybe I think in Africa, I'll not see any genuinely independent state. Maybe when we look at the American War of Independence, there we can look at maybe the US because it also gained independence from the what? From from the
The
British.
British
But
in
in Africa we
1776.
have puppet. Mhm. But in Africa we have puppet states.
I think apart from
Then
Eritrea, apart from Eritrea is the one which is independent. Maybe Zimbabwe too to some extent, and Ethiopia. There's very few of them.
mhm.
But these Ugandas, the Kenyas, they are really not independent. Nigeria, Ghana completely is a puppet state. South Africa is trying to fight back to a certain extent, but all the others are weak,
The-
complete puppet states.
Then we have neocolonialism, which is now almost everywhere. Even in Asia, we have neocolonialism in Africa, in South America,
Yes,
everywhere.
and it's being
Mm.
carried out
I was even
by the collective, group, gang of imperialistic
imperialists.
countries.
They all have their interests.
Yes. But all these are being
Mm.
controlled by the capitalist imperialist states,
Mm.
led by the United States. Now,
Ac-
I
ac-
don't know I don't know where we should put China when it comes to this definition here, when it comes to this analysis which Nkrumah, gave us here. Why would you put
of imperialism. You see the problem of these nations like Russia. You
Mm,
see, Russia is an imperialist state, but its imperialism manifests most times in Europe. In Europe, have you realized it? It does not want to control states like in Africa or anywhere. It wants to control the areas around it, the countries around it.
okay. Just
Even
like what we are seeing with
mm,
Ukraine and Belarus and all those European countries.
uh,
But can we
it
conclude
wants to
that this
control areas around it.
Can we conclude that this is imperialism when these territories belong to Russia to at a certain level?
It is it is sometimes imperialism because the people have the right to self-determination.
Okay.
But
So
anyway,
but
but
if we say for example in the case of Ukraine, uh, that it is imperialism on the side of Russia, what should we say of the United States which came in and, for example, overthrew the government in Ukraine in 2014?
the reason why Putin was trying to win the ideological war, it is that because he was alleging that they are neo-Nazis. That was the biggest factor
Okay.
that was approving his entrance into Ukraine.
Mm.
But when you look at China, China is suffering from a problem of surplus capital
Hmm.
and a large population.
No, no, no. Wait.
The large,
I wanted us to first to
mm,
finish Ukraine. I wanted that to first finish Ukraine and Russia, the issue of Ukraine and Russia. I wanted to see. I just wanted to hear your take on the United States interference into Ukraine in 2014 and overthrowing the government there. How do you want to look at this? And of course, Russia's concerns that these United States and it wants to come close and put weapons close to Russia's doorstep. So how do we categorize this in the context of what Nkrumah is trying to present here? Because you say
what
that
I know it
Russia
is that
you say that Russia is partially an imperialistic state, of course, which I would want to agree with. But also there is these concerns that the United States is trying to exert its imperialistic pressure in this area, and then also to try maybe to some extent to subjugate Russia and you know make it some sort of puppet states, because of course the United States has wanted for a long time to make Russia a puppet state by sponsoring some puppets within that. So can't we conclude that Russia is also fighting for its independence, and therefore it is not a puppet state
Right?
on one side? I mean, it's not
Of,
an imperialistic state.
of course, Russia is fighting a geopolitical. You know, you should not be having all neighbors when they are your enemy, when they are agents of your enemy. Not so.
Yes,
It is very wrong. So you have to get into influence.
yes,
But the USA itself, it is what it is. They call it a world power.
yes.
So it is actually an imperialist power.
A
Not so.
capitalist imperialistic state.
It is an imperialist state.
Mm,
But Russia has also its issues. You see, Russia is influencing the multipolar world. You have heard of that thing.
of course. Both of them with China, they are doing.
Uh, before 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 China became a world power, it is Russia which was defending the nations which were refusing
To be
to be
colonized.
ruled by the USA.
Yes,
Not so.
yes.
But now those nations themselves have now developed and now they can refuse by themselves, like the North Koreans, the Irans, the so
Cuba.
these nations. So USA and Russia, they had their agreements which were stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons and technology to other nations, because it is nuclear weapons which sometimes make a country to be independent. Not so.
Mm,
But nowadays you'll find a country when it has its own nuclear weapon, which means it can refuse the US's what interests. So
mm.
the US and Russia are still in the ideological conflict. It's not just that's why even Iran is putting weapons into the Ukrainian war.
Mm.
It's not that they are fighting USA and what and Russia, but it is an ideological war. It is the left versus the right.
So now there's been the question of what is the nature of Israel as a state. Is it an imperialistic state, or how can we categorize Israel?
Israel is an imperialist colony.
It's a colony.
Mm. Israel was formed after the World War, not so,
Yes.
because of the it is called which happens in it is called Auschwitz, Poland. That
Mm.
thing where the Nazis exterminated the Jews, they formed that state of Israel
Yes.
to keep the Jews. But the Jews who came were most of them were of European ancestry.
Mm.
They call themselves the Ashkenazi Jews. So
Mm.
these Jews settled and they displaced the what?
The
They
Palestine.
they are the Mazrui Jews. Not only that, they displaced the Palestinians, but they are these Jews, but who were originally there, who are like Arabs, not so.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Then there are these black Jews, so they displaced them.
Mm.
But these Jews had the support of the Americans and the what?
Absolutely. Even
And the British.
up to today, they do have it.
Yeah, so the British are the ones who, through the Rothschilds, who formed Israel.
Mm.
And up to today, Israel gets weapon technology, it gets all weapons, military support, anything it wants from the US and the UK.
Yes.
So it is a settler colony, but it's not actually. If Israel would be left alone, Hamas and Hezbollah would beat it. Have you realized it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They would have beat it long time, even during the Yom Kippur, the so-called Yom Kippur War. They would have defeated it.
Mm, they would have defeated it, but America has already stationed 2,000 soldiers to enter the war in case Israel.
They give it aid. They even give it aid around $4 billion every year. Aid in
For
so this is
military.
also helping it, military support, all the new weapons they give it. Actually, I think they said that if even if Israel was not in there in the Middle East, they would have created another Israel, the imperialists. That's what they said.
Because Joseph Stalin gave them land in near. You have you read about it? He gave them land near Lake Baikal, there in the bush to create their land. They refused. They even gave them land here in Uganda. They refused.
Yes,
So when they refused,
yeah, I remember for the Uganda when I read about it, they wanted to come to either Kenya or Uganda to create an Israel state there.
and for them they wanted, and for them in the end they refused. They wanted to go up.
Mm.
So they went to they wanted the original lands, but they gave them the UN gave them borders. But after the Yom Kippur War, they went beyond their borders and they captured lands.
Yes.
Then the land in the Sinai Peninsula was given back after this man Nikita Khrushchev of the USSR threatened what? Threatened threatened the threatened the United States and Israel that he would shoot nuclear weapons. That's when they gave them Sinai and Alexandria also.
Yes, yes.
After they
Sinai, I
call,
think the Sinai Peninsula belongs to Africa.
yeah, that is the Camp David Accords.
Yeah.
Then after the part of the Golan Heights of Lebanon was given partly was given back after the 2006 Lebanese Israeli-Lebanese conflict, which Israel lost.
They are still
So it
occupying some
controls
parts
part.
of Syria, I think. They are still occupying parts of
Yeah,
Syria.
mm,
Is it the
the
Golan
occupying
Heights?
parts of Syria,
What is
the
that?
Golan Heights.
Yeah, I think it's the Golan Heights.
That's the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
hmm So they can defeat it anytime. But
Okay.
it's just a settler colony.
Mm.
Israel is not even a very big power, by the way.
Mm.
I would not consider it because when you see like the war Russia is fighting in Ukraine, it cannot be fought by Israel
Mm. They will
because
just
you'll
crush them.
find
Look at how the Hamas entered inside without even much weapons and stuff. But they entered inside and crushed them. And they even started removing their
because
aircraft. For Russia, I think
you know when you start bombing. Mm,
yeah, I
oh,
think
when you start bombing indiscriminately, it becomes you have already lost. I
mm,
get a person who is the enemy, kill him, then you become a big man.
mm,
But not killing children, what you bomb buildings.
yeah, they have lost
I
morally,
think it's sad.
morally before even the international community, they have lost, any argument because of what they are doing. And people will never look at them
Mm.
the same way.
Anyway, there is this General Moss. You know him, General Moss.
Yes.
The one Israeli general.
Mm.
He
Yes.
said that the Palestinians will never win the war,
Mm.
and he believes in fighting back retaliatory attacks.
Mm.
But nowadays the issue has changed because of the multipolar world. There are very many powers which influences. Hezbollah now can influence issues. Iran can influence.
Yeah, for me,
Very many nations. Turkey.
even this year after the after the how do you call it? After the Iran Saudi Arabia deal, I
Mm,
think Israel should have read the changing of times and started adjusting itself. Instead of attacking the
mm,
Palestinians, it should have known that something has really changed within these regions. But it is even pushing itself harder into problems by allying with the United States. Yet it doesn't know that the times have really changed. The multipolar world has kicked in. This I thought that it would read the signs with the Israel Iran, I mean, with the Saudi Arabia Iran deal, which was brokered by China. I think Israel by that time should have been able to read the signs that there's something really new that is happening. The multipolar world has kicked in, and the new powers arrived on the scene. But I think they have not been
You
able
know,
to do so.
the problem of this world.
Mm,
It is one thing. When the Ukrainian war it is happening, all satellites are focusing on the what? On Ukraine.
mm,
All intelligence organizations focus on Ukraine, Russia, what? So this Shinbet had focused in another place.
mm,
It had not focused in Gaza.
mm,
It it had focused is it Rafah border crossing. Those things do happen. Most of the intelligence organizations were all working towards where?
mm,
Ukraine.
mm.
And yet the man was preparing.
Okay. Yeah, so
Anyway.
let's get into
Mm,
the reading. So I think I don't remember very well where we stopped, but I have some reading here, maybe where we can start from. What I'm seeing
mm,
from the graph 2. These reforms helped to blur fundamental contradictions and to remove some of the more glaring injustices, while at the same time ensuring the continued exploitation of the workers. And I think this one is talking about the conditions, training facilities, which you spoke about, that internally the workers, when they demanded better working conditions, they were given and professional trainings and facilities. So these reforms internally within the imperialistic camp, they helped to blur the fundamental contradictions and to remove some of the more glaring injustices, while at the same time ensuring the continued exploitation of the workers. I think they have been talking about this. People have been talking about this, even people like Richard Wolff have been talking about this. Professor Richard Wolff, I think you know him, right? He's a socialist in the United States. The myth
yeah.
was established of an affluent capitalist society promising abundance and a better life for all. The basic aim, however, was the establishment of a welfare state as the only safeguard against the threat of fascism or communism. However, the problem was to find a way to avoid sacrificing the all important principle of ever increasing profits for the owning minority, and also to find the money needed to finance the welfare state. So on one side, they wanted to maintain the capitalistic profit, which went to only a few, as we have seen even recently. Oxfam has been coming up with figures that the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. I think Nkrumah even wrote about this in some of his books. He called them the haves and have-nots in the 60s. Even right now, sometimes they use that term. Um, they
Mm,
wanted to maintain that. You see that these days they say that 50% of the wealth of the globe is being controlled by only a few 1% of the population or something.
mm,
Yeah, so while they own, I think those guys, they own more than the bottom 50% of the world, which is around 3.5 billion people. The 1% at the top, they own more wealth than the 50% of the global population. So which is very
mm,
worrying. So I think this is what Nkrumah was talking about, that this gap was going to continue to increase, and they wanted it to be maintained. That so that is why they gave some token benefits to the workers within their various countries, um, and of course to continue to finance the Western economies so that they can continue to grow, and then at the same time continue to exploit internally and exploit the African and the global South, resources. And that is where we hear people like Joseph. I think the guy is called Joseph Barrow, who's from the European Union diplomat, who was saying that Europe is a garden. I think Africa is a farm or something like that. He was saying that
mm,
Africa is a farm, and their farm, they just come and whatever they want. I think this speaks very much to this sentiment. But at the same time, when you read Ray Dalio's book, Principles of How to Deal with the Changing World Order, principles of how to deal with the changing world order, how nations rise and fall. He's been speaking about the problems in the world today that he's seeing. He has been saying that he's a capitalist, by the way. He owns the biggest hedge fund. He's worth around $20 billion. He's been talking about the fact that there's three important forces or four that are going on right now uh, today, and he's saying that there is the rise of a new global power, which is China, which is challenging the current, order, and there is the rise of the forces of contention, the rising gap between the poor and the rich, the haves and have-nots in the United States. So the income gaps, he calls it the income gap, that the gap has really increased.
Income inequality.
Yes, income inequality. So he calls it the income gap. So he doesn't want to say income inequality actually when he's speaking on American TVs, because he will be maybe some sort of blacklisted or cancelled. They call it cancelling these days. So he spoke about that
Hmm.
rising income gaps in the United States, that they show that the United States is in really big trouble. And the differences, of course, between the political parties in the United States, they have become extreme in their approach. And of course, the United States debt right now, I think it has knocked around $32 trillion, even though they have an economy of 24 trillion. So these are the forces which he has been mentioning, that this spells danger for the United States, in many cases. So by the way of a solution, capitalism proceeded to introduce not only internal reforms, but external reforms designed to raise the extra money needed for the establishment and the maintenance of the welfare state at home. So these um, these reforms which capitalism did, they did them internally and externally to continue that process of the maintenance of the welfare state in the capitalist metropolis. In other words, modern capitalism had come to depend more heavily than before on the exploitation of the material and human resources of the colonial territories. On the external front, therefore, it became necessary for international finance capital to carry out reforms in order to eliminate the deadly threat to its supremacy of the liberation movement. And this is what we see with the overthrow of, Lumumba, the killing of Lumumba, the overthrow of Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, and all the others, Che Guevara, all these were challenging international capital, and so they were eliminated. The urgent need for such reforms was made clear by the powerful growth and expansion of the liberation forces in Africa. The urgent need for such reforms was made clear by the powerful growth and expansion of the liberation forces in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where revolutionary movements had not only seized the power, but were actually consolidating their gains. Developments in the USSR, China, Cuba, North Vietnam, North Korea, and in Egypt, Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Algeria, and other parts of Africa showed that not only was the world balance of forces shifting, but that the capitalist imperialist states were confronted with a real danger of encirclement. So I think this one is very clear, right? Or do you want to say something on it?
Hmm.
Are you there? Can you hear me? I don't know. No, can you hear me?
Tone. I'm trying to reanalyze it on the external and the internal pressures, then on the contradictions within You were talking about the contradictions.
Yes, so Nkrumah was expanding actually on the contradictions within the capitalist state and how it started approaching that confrontation
Mm,
within and without. And of course, the immediate reaction of capital, finance capital or capitalism was to overthrow the liberation movements which were gaining ground, all across the world.
mm,
And Nkrumah is mentioning in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where revolutionary movements had not only seized the power, but were actually consolidating their gains. He spoke of the developments in Soviet Union, USSR, China, Cuba, North
mm.
Vietnam, North Korea, and
North
including
Korea,
Egypt,
mm,
Ghana,
Mali.
Guinea, Mali, and Algeria, and other parts of Africa. This showed that not only was the world balance of forces shifting, but the capitalist imperialist states were confronted with the real danger of encirclement because the poor now had encircled them. So they felt it necessary to do reforms. And these reforms, of course, were targeted at preserving the imperialist state. And to preserve the imperialist state, that means you had to create a welfare state. Actually, I did not understand this concept of welfare state until I read it clearly to see what it is, especially from Nkrumah. He's the one who explained it very well, to me. So this meant that you have to reorient the capital, and the way you exploit the former colonies has to be to a certain extent to the benefit of the welfare state by giving your people in Europe and the United States and the Western world benefits, certain benefits. You continue benefiting, but you give them certain benefits. So this means for me, from my understanding, that then the former colonies had to suffer much more compared to before when they were being exploited directly. I don't know what you think.
Yes, the welfare state it is in the capitalist nations.
Yes,
Not so.
yes,
So the
absolutely.
welfare state, the state is providing for the people better services. It is using like the money they get in form of taxes to provide better services. But when you look at the when you look at us, like us in the colonies which gained independence, we shall look at neo-colonialism. They
Mm.
deceived us and they gave us independence. Then you become happy. Then they exert force through what? They exert. They continue collecting resources through hidden ways
The
that you
IMF,
cannot understand.
the IMF, they are
And
using
so like through IMF policies, even through aids, the the aid,
Yes,
the
yes.
aid of the IMF, whereby, for example, they put strings attached to the
Mm.
aid given to the nations.
Yes,
Then we shall look at the puppet states. They choose for you the leaders, they
yes.
influence. Like for example, France has been influencing some in some countries and nations. So
Even
uh,
President Ruto, I've been hearing that it is the American who brought him. They are the ones who paid for his campaigns. That's what I've been hearing in the corners, and of course, a lot of other African countries. And and of course,
mm,
in some situations, we have some leaders who willingly give in. People like Akufo-Addo, they have already bought into the system. They thought when they were coming, they were brought up this way to think that this system works. So for them, they willingly give in. They don't even have to be convinced, to come, that they should convince them to contribute to the capitalist state, to the capitalist
you,
imperialist state.
you see, like what Karl Marx said.
Mm.
Karl Marx said that the people, the working class of Europe, I think you have seen even Nkrumah has written some. The working class of Europe and the one of Africa is divided.
Yes.
I think you have witnessed in the texts.
Yes, I saw
The
it.
the working class of Europe gets like sorry, the working class of Africa gets the raw materials, works on it from the bushes, it extracts everything, then you send it to to Europe in semi-processed forms, not so.
Yes.
So when you send it to Europe in semi-processed forms, these people, the working class of Europe, they are just seated, they are doing easy work, but they are paid very well because of the labor laws of their nations. But for you in Africa, you are paid peanuts because of the what of the poor labor laws,
Mm.
because of very many factors. You will find that you are being exploited than the working class of Europe. So
Yes.
you'll find that what you're fighting for in Africa is different from what the working class of like for example the UK is fighting for, even if you are dealing in the same industry.
Mm.
So it is divided.
So
It
what
is a
sort of
divided
what is the
working class.
solution that Lenin prescribes for this particular situation? The fact that these two groups are divided. What is his prescription?
They call it ideological. Is it ideological suicide? They call it what? It is that you have to realign yourselves with the. In fact, they make it like collectivism. You
Mm.
have to get to know the working class of the conditions of the people from the root to the what to from where you're getting the goods, the raw materials up to where you are. Then you understand the conditions and then you fight for the whole industry because they are being exploited together. That is somewhere he calls it, but the people who are in Europe have actually the working class of Africa put so much uh, should not put so much of itself on the same level with the European working class. But it can get allies. You know, in the struggle, you have to be with
Yes.
allies, not so.
Yes. Yes.
You should not be alone.
Yes. You should
And
have.
that's why you see Fidel Castro sent Cuban soldiers to fight for Africans in the Battle of Quito Cuane Valley. I
Yes.
think you have heard of Cuban soldiers. So he was showing us that we are allies,
Yes.
Africa and South America.
Mm.
But I think you have read about the base and the superstructure,
Mm-mm.
something in ideological education. There is the base and the superstructure.
Mm.
The base it is the extraction of goods and services. They extract from us.
Mm.
Then the superstructure it is like the way in Europe. When you look political economy, you have read political economy. Those are
Yes.
uh, production of goods and services.
Yes.
Then you produce, you distribution of services. Then consumption of goods and services.
Mm.
Then there is the laws. The laws when the base changes, the superstructure changes. But in the when you look at all of that, you will find that Africa is the base. It
Mm.
is where all extractions of goods and all extractions of raw materials take place. Actually, Africa and South America,
Mm.
and you'll find that. But then you'll find that the people in America deal with uh, semi-processed or semi-finished goods. But for us, very much work is on the side of what? Of dealing with raw materials. It is too much work, not so?
Yes. It's more menu.
And there are too much losses. So there is that big division. You'll
Mm.
find that Nkrumah also sees that divide. I think I've passed on something of that sort.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
the working class of Europe, for it wants better uh, higher wages, better working conditions,
And
professional training facilities.
in some cases, they have
But
given them these conditions. I was looking at the conditions of the mechanical engineers because I'm a mechanical engineer. And if you go to Europe, a
uh,
mechanical engineer, of my experience, is paid, very good money, almost up to 60,000 to $80,000, or even in some cases up to 60,000 pounds. But when you come to Africa,
mm.
even paying you, $1,000 is a problem. You see, they see it as if they are doing you a big favor, and you will find that it is the same company. The same company wants to come to Africa and pay less than $1,000. But when you go to Europe, they are
But,
paying close to 4,000, 4,000, four
but
thousand dollars or
but are you seeing something funny?
mm,
When you see in the what what is the European class working class advocating for, you'll not see that there is independence for the what? For the African countries. Are you seeing it
yes, absolutely. They are caring
anyway?
about their own.
It's not there.
So for me, what
They
I
are
think
caring about
we
their
might
own
have to
interests.
we as Africans or and the global South, of course, with Latin America working with them, we have to fight our only struggle against this imperialistic capitalism and capitalist system and take power. Because until we take power, we cannot do anything about the situation. And the puppets,
That's
we
why
have to
black.
remove them. We have to find a
Mm,
way of removing them, and the options for removing these puppets, I think they have to be all on the table. We have to put all the options on the table. And of course, this book, I believe, Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare is what it is about.
Steve Biko says that black man, you're out on your own.
Mm.
I think I've read that
Yes,
thing.
yes,
Then, Chairman Omali Stella says that power is the only equalizer.
yes.
You see, once you don't have power, you'll never be what? You'll never talk.
Mm.
You'll always remain down. So it is the equalizer. It is Africa to regain back the power.
Anyway, we'll come back and
I
talk
think
about. I want us
we
to do
can
an
continue.
analysis. I would like us to do an analysis on President Museveni and the other African leaders, generally, not only him, but the state of the African continent and the state of the African, heads of state. I don't want to call them leaders. Many people these days they don't call them leaders. They call them heads of state. To analyze at
Mm,
least and group them, and we see because this will help us to understand in what position is is the continent and what must we do for each of this group, these people we have grouped on the continent. What is to be done for them? Are we supposed to remove them by force? Are we supposed to compete against them at the ballot box? Is it possible? And are we supposed to demonstrate against them until they are relieved of power? What is it that we are supposed to do about them? Because I believe that this analysis will help us to know the way forward for the African continent. Anyway, I think let's go to the next reading. Here, Nkrumah is talking about collective imperialism. The modifications introduced by imperialism in its strategy were expressed through the disappearance of the numerous old-fashioned colonies, owing exclusive allegiance to a single metropolitan country, and also through the replacement of national imperialisms by a collective imperialism in which the United States occupies a leading position. I think Nkrumah makes this position even in his book called Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, whereby he says that foremost amongst the leading imperialists is the United States. And when he published actually that
mm,
book, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism in 1965, he was still the president of Ghana, and the United States protested against the book, and they banned it from being published in Europe and anywhere in the world. They banned the book and they protested against it. They were supposed to give Ghana some $20 million in aid. They blocked that man and they said that the man is dangerous. They should remove him. The book actually, in certain cases, they say it catalyzed the process of removing him from power. So in here, he's repeating the same thing that through the modification, the imperialists made modifications, and in this strategy was expressed through the disappearance of numerous old colonies. So they stopped talking about that these are our colonies. And these
mm,
colonies, of course, they stopped, owing exclusive allegiance to these particular countries like Britain, even though, of course, we see that Britain later created the Commonwealth, and France created the Franc Afrique. France is the one which actually wanted to some extent to maintain this point, this first point, the exclusive allegiance that these countries are supposed to remain exclusively allegiant to it. So I think right now what we are seeing in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is just breaking off this old colonialism, which of course we don't know whether it will help if they are being ushered into the United States colonialism. Now, through the replacement of these national imperialisms by a collective imperialism in which the United States occupies a leading position. So the national imperialists, which were formed at the Berlin Conference, whereby they shared the territories like in Africa, were replaced by collective imperialism. And you have seen that in the during a meeting which happened this year in France, there was a summit which was called the New Global Finance Pact, New Global Finance Pact in France. France also was speaking as a collective, as part of that imperialist system, whereby it was talking about the reform at the IMF, that we are going to reform the IMF. But of course, we know that the IMF and World Bank, the leading, a contributor to these institutions is the United States. But of course, France is following in this. I think this is what Nkrumah is talking about by collective imperialism, that now these countries are working together under the leadership of the United States. And of course, we have seen this even the provocations in the South China Sea, where they are provoking, China, and they are mobilizing. The United States is mobilizing Australia, Britain, and all these countries in this coalition. I think it's called the occupies: Australia, US, United Kingdom, occupies. I think which other countries there. I don't know whether it is South Korea, which is part of that. There is a new coalition which it created in the Pacific, which is supposed to provoke China and so-called counter China. And the United States, of course, is the one which is leading this process. We can see this also in the United States mobilizing Europe and the European countries and the Western countries in boycotting uh, technology from China, Huawei, and blacklisting China, and then also blocking technology from going to China. It mobilized South Korea, Japan, uh, it mobilized Netherlands and all the other countries. So I think this is very evident in the point that Nkrumah is making right here. And of course, the confrontation of Russia, a confrontation against Russia, the invasion of Iraq, all of them, they went to the United States under its leadership. Germany was there, Britain, and all these countries, Belgium, and we are seeing also in Gaza, where they are attacking the Hamas and the Palestinian people. Germany is there also supporting, Britain is there supporting under the leadership of the United States. So through the replacement of national imperialisms by a collective imperialism in which the United States occupies a leading position, the United States of America. I don't know what you think of, of this point.
I think it's true.
Mm,
What you're talking about is true. And the USA it is also spearheading the world capitalism, which is the world economic model
mm, mm, mm.
of because USA advocates for license free market economy
Yes, but
in most of the nations.
at home, the United States itself is carrying out state capitalism. I don't know whether you have heard of the National Security Advisor of the United States of Joe Biden, Joe Biden's government. He gave a speech. In that speech, he mentioned how the United States needs to take over the important industries, and he's the
You
leading
see,
strategist in the Joe Biden administration when it comes to the economic matters and economic strategy. They have now passed the CHIPS Act to give subsidies to the semiconductor industry. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is supposed to give subsidies to the renewable energy industry and the vehicle renewable energy vehicles, and they are working on securing, of course, raw materials from Africa for what they are always calling the supply chains. They are trying to build a railway line from to connect from Zimbabwe, from Zambia to Democratic Republic of Congo and all the way to the Lobito corridor, to the Lobito port in Angola, so that they can ship off all these resources which are in the copper belt and cobalt, of course, which we know that Congo contributes about 70% of the world cobalt, and send it to the United States. It's the same way which they used to do in the colonial times. So while the United States is pushing for this so-called capitalism or private capitalism, free market economy, it is engaging in militarism, stealing oil, which I've been talking about today with somebody, stealing oil with militarism in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and all these countries, and then coming to Africa and rehabilitating a railway line from Angola to Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, to extract raw materials and send them and build and finance its own vehicle industry. But all these are being done by the state, not private and free market, because they are not buying these resources at market prices, which they are buying from the Democratic Republic of Congo or Zambia.
You, there is no, when you look at economics, they will tell you that there is no a truly free market economy. All economies have, like the United States of America, it has some vital resources that cannot be left out without being controlled by the state.
Mm.
Then in the free market economy, still there is a government hand of, like there you have said, providing incentives. Then also we are looking at intellectual properties. Then we are intellectual property, of course, like in production of goods and services. You find some things have to be hidden also.
Yes.
Some are secrets. Then you'll find another thing that you cannot trust traders, because traders can sabotage the economy.
Yes.
When the economy is in the hands of the middle class, it cannot be a state.
Yes.
So a state has to run when it can touch all the vital, it has control over the vital sectors.
Yeah, so
But
but me what
uh,
disturbs me is that our African economists they defend this thing with missionary zeal, almost like they are the ones who created it. Almost they are the ones who originate this thing originated from them, and they will defend it and say private capitalism, private sector. Even Museveni hear him saying these things. The private sector. He was saying that I mean when he came, he disturbed the private sector. This is where I have problems with Museveni. And
have you seen the United Fruit Company?
yes, yes,
What it caused in South America?
Latin America, yes.
It is what made the Che Guevara to change even his mind
Yeah, that is why he was very
from a doctor to
that's what
uh
made him
the
angry.
whole of Guatemala. The United Fruit Company, just a company of bananas,
Mm,
made governments to be overthrown. It made people to be infected with many diseases. It caused death by the United States government. But the United States government protects the interests of the what? Of multinational companies.
yes.
Actually, what we were supposed to look at when we look at this thing of international finance capital,
Mm,
when we got back to chart number one,
mm,
what is the international finance capital? It is like, for example, if you, my brother Kwame, you have opened up a business in Ghana, not so.
mm,
You start up a small business, you start making profits, not so.
mm,
Then the profits are accumulated over time.
mm,
You will say, I have my friend in Sierra Leone.
mm,
What should I do? And
mm,
in Sierra Leone, there are some goods which are easy because you have let me say you have a capitalist mentality. You start up a business in Sierra Leone.
mm,
You will start, you make too much money. You
mm,
send the money to Nigeria.
mm,
Remember, you're using the money money from Ghana to exploit many people, not so.
mm,
So by the end, you'll become like Dangote,
mm,
not so.
mm,
So Dangote has a lot of money. So the money that he has, you start investing it in. You create a multinational company. You'll find it investing even in China. You'll find it investing in South America.
mm,
That is international flows of capital.
mm,
So uh, Karl Marx and the Lenins they call it surplus capital. I think I've ever heard of it. So
mm,
it is surplus capital investments which cause the which make exploitation of countries because when you have surplus capital and you're a very rich man, you want to control the flow of raw materials from and the whole production line. Not so.
mm,
So you'll find a person, for example, in the UK dealing in I've seen people dealing in France in guitars,
mm,
controlling the whole production line from the trees, cutting trees in Congo
mm.
up to making the guitars in France, acoustic guitars. So
Yes.
that man will want to reduce the cost by controlling the whole production line. So that is what international finance capital,
Yeah.
which favors the capitalist exploitation of all other nations where the capital is within the reach.
Mm,
So that the international finance capital brings upon the multinational companies like the Coca-Colas, the what,
mm,
Pepsi Cola, even the finance capital also helps in reaching the available what markets,
mm,
also exploiting workers. Uh, so there is a lot. Capitalist exploitation, extreme capitalism is also financed by capital.
mm,
Because you see, most of these nations they will not go to exploit people themselves.
mm.
They will have agents, and agents it is their private what enterprises.
Yes.
Those proprietors
Mm,
they will go and they start up businesses. Like you will find like the reason why Uganda went maybe to South Sudan, it is because of its traders who
mm,
are there, not so.
mm,
So they control the market of South Sudan and then the Eastern DRC. That's why you will find that the soldiers, most of them are there.
mm,
So it is to protect the market, but the market is not sought for by the government apparatuses. It is sought for by the what? By the middle class of that nation.
mm,
Huh?
mm, mm.
Uh-huh. Mm. I think that's it.
Okay. So I think we'll start from there. Next time we'll pick it from there. We have run almost for a full hour, so we can take it from there next time.
Let me see. Then the second, let me first look at this.
Mm.
Uh,
We were at
the
collective
second,
imperialism. The modifications
yeah,
which were introduced by imperialism in its strategy were expressed through the disappearance of the old-fashioned colonies
fashion colonies.
and then through the replacement of national imperialism by a collective imperialism in which the
Uh-huh,
United States occupied the leading position.
that one you have spoken about it.
Mm,
But when you see that the development, the the urgent need for such reforms was made clear by the powerful growth and expansion of liberation forces in Africa, Asia, Latin America,
yes,
where revolutionary movements had not only seized power
yes,
but were actually consolidating their gains.
yes,
Development in the USSR, China, Cuba, North Vietnam.
yes,
Remember, North Vietnam was still under Ho Chi Minh.
yes.
It came and it fought and united with the South to
Actually,
form the
President Nkrumah
Vietnam
was
also.
overthrown. He had gone to mediate that conflict, in in 1966, he had been invited to Vietnam to mediate the conflict before they overthrew him.
Mm.
Mm. So that conflict was still ongoing.
So they say that in Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Algeria, and other parts of Africa, showed not only was the world balance of forces shifting, but that the capitalist imperialist states were confronted with a real danger of encirclement.
Yes.
So it is it's not that these countries that it showed not only was the balance of forces shifting. It not only showed that these people were what these forces were shifting.
Mm.
I think this leads this here we are looking at the Cold War,
Mm.
not so.
Mm.
Then the United States is fighting back at this encirclement
Mm. Mm. Mm.
with the Cold War, with the Cold War.
Mm.
But again, it is these nations which again develop into the very big what? The big guns of the non-aligned movement. I think you have seen the non-aligned movement.
Yes, Ghana actually was a founding member of the non-aligned movement. Egypt was a founding member. I think it was the Bandung Conference which formed the non-aligned movement. So Ghana was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Algeria, I don't know whether Algeria was part, but I think Ghana definitely was part. Nkrumah was part of it. Egypt was.
Mm-hmm.
Egypt was part also.
That is Gamal Abdel Nasser.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it is these nations which go back and create a problem. Those of China, they have grown now.
Yes.
There is nothing they can do to them.
Mm.
Anyway, we shall continue.
Okay, we shall pick it from
Shall
there.
continue.
Yeah, China has really grown very big. That is why they are trying to defeat Russia and then get a chance to contain China. Because China has really grown to the point that it is becoming very difficult for them to control. So I think this is a chance
But
for us. This is a chance for us also as
China,
Africans, because
uh,
majorly
mm,
it is around these periods of chaos that Africans have gotten a chance to get a breakthrough. So I think we have also to increase our pressure on the African continent, on these puppets which we have on the continent, and overthrow some of them, remove them in one way or another, to be able at least to consolidate. Even if we consolidate like 10 states, I think that will be at least enough to create a position of gravity, center of gravity for the unified African state. I think so.
anyway, for me, I talk as a scholar.
You say what?
I talk as a scholar.
Okay.
You see,
Mm,
uh, you see, in this Africa,
mm,
there are people. There is people are divided into classes.
yes.
Here we have the here we have the the proletariat. Then
Definitely.
the proletariat. Then we have the national bourgeoisie.
Mm.
But we don't have the capitalist class in Africa. Then we have for us we have again the opportunists.
But you
Then
don't have
the elite class.
Dangote is a capitalist.
Hmm?
Dangote is a capitalist.
Which one?
Dangote, people like
Yes.
there is another guy who's the founder of the United Bank of Africa. Is called Tony Elumelu. He's always even talking about that we should all be Afro-capitalists. There's a term which he came up with, and he calls it Afro-capitalists. That we should all be Afro-capitalists. So I think that these type of
Is
people,
the,
Adenonga, Musopi, and then
no,
those are
like Dangote is not a capitalist. Even those people, they are all locked into something which is very wrong. You see, in Africa, we don't have a capitalist. You know why?
mm-hmm. Let me hear
Because
about that.
have you read like when the naira deflate when there is inflation and deflation of the naira,
Yeah, the
Dangote
devaluation.
has no say and he loses over millions of nairas in that issue, not so?
Yes, I heard him actually. He was talking about this that he wants to invest some of his wealth in the United States because of the devaluation of the naira.
Because he has lost too much.
Yes.
So in Africa, there is no one who has a stable wealth that he cannot lose. Even you have seen people like presidents who have accumulated so much wealth, they can lose their seats. They are like Gaddafi, for example. Also,
Mm.
he was a billionaire. In minutes, he had lost a lot. So we don't have the capitalist class resides in the USA. Here we are having the national bourgeoisie, the national capitalists, who are facilitating the exploitation of Africa on their behalf.
So I think there is what Mao calls the comprador bourgeoisie, and then there's what he differentiates between that, and there's this calls the comprador bourgeoisie who are like parasites who are importing things from outside and exploiting their fellow, citizens, and then he divides and calls the other, national bourgeoisie, those ones who want to contribute to the growth of the nation and stuff like that, in one way or the other, of course, not entirely. I don't know what you think about that. I heard this from Museveni, the one who was talking about it a time ago.
Now, like you'll find people like Adeleke, people dealing in oil.
Mm,
A person you'll find you are not mining. Maybe you are just controlling the production line, but you don't control the oil refinery.
mm.
Anytime, that's why you'll find that some people are sanctioned. Like when they sanction Nigeria, you'll find people becoming very broke. Have you realized this?
Of course.
But can you sanction the UK, the rich men of the UK
No, you can't.
or the US?
It's difficult
You
unless the
cannot
whole
because
South comes together to work on this.
because the capitalist class has gained entrance into the elite. Actually, the elite class of the US has components of the capitalist class. You find people like those of the Trumps, the Bush. Those are very wealthy families, not so,
Mm, mm,
with very big interests.
mm,
So the elite is combined but in Africa you'll find that the elite is instead of being with the capitalist class, it is too much into the military. Have you realized this?
mm.
In Africa, the center of power is not, it is the military,
Maybe
not not
maybe
not
in
not
East
rather
Africa,
money so
in
much.
some parts of East Africa, but in West Africa, majorly the military has been weakened and made almost useless. Like in Ghana, the military is almost useless. That they have almost a thousand, 30,000 troops, but they have to bring in the United States with maybe 2,000, troops. They say that they have come to protect, the country from terrorism, which is coming from Burkina Faso and the Sahel. And yet the country has about more than 30,000 troops. And when you go to
Now
places
the
like Burkina Faso, Mali, all these places, the military had been weakened so that they can bring in the colonial troops from France and the United States to be present in these territories. So I think that the
now
military
it means
has
the capitalist class there has overstood you.
Yes, it has overthrown because if you look at the economy, like for example in Ghana and all the other French colonies, former French colonies, the capitalistic class from the metropolis had taken over. Like you look at a group, a company, a corporation from France, which is called Ballot, uh, it controls over 18 ports in West Africa, including Ghana's biggest port, Tema, and of course many others,
Mm,
Ivory Coast. And when you look at the economy of Ghana, the three major, you know, uh, export, products, foreign earners, they are
mm,
controlled by foreigners, including the financial sector. So gold, cocoa, and oil, all of them are controlled by foreign companies, the capitalist, group from the capitalistic class from the West. They are the ones who control the finance industry. is also controlled by them. The construction industry, the same thing is controlled by the metropolis that were outsiders, capitalist outsiders from the West and maybe some from India. The steel now is controlled by Indians. So there's nothing really.
That's it.
Steel, like how you see in Uganda, the manufacturing of steel,
Mm.
yeah, iron rods and all those which are used for construction. They are controlled. That one is controlled by Indians, like how it is in Uganda. So yeah, so in Ghana and these other countries, the military has really been weakened. That things have been made dysfunctional. The state, generally, the state has been weakened and taken over by the Western capitalists.
Well, then that is it. It is okay.
Okay, so
I think we close.
okay, we will start from there next time.
It's okay. Have a good night, brother.
Have a good night. Thank you so much. Then.
Thank you so much too. Until we meet again.
Okay, bye bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.